Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to wait a minute or two just for the numbers to rack up in the participants. But thank you all for joining us. Okay, great. We might get started. So thank you all for joining this evening's session. Or I'm saying that as coming from Ireland, but I know for many of the attendees here today, it's actually probably a good morning or a good evening or wherever it is that you're calling from. My name is Dale Whelehan, and I am the CEO of 4-Day Week Global. 4-Day Week Global, we're a not-for-profit company. We're aiming to create 1 million new years of free time. And we have been publishing research over the last few years in conjunction with our academic partners in Boston College, Professor Juliet Schor, here with us today. And I suppose it's become apparent over the last year in particular that the benefits of a 4-day week have become multifold. We're seeing that this is something that's good, not just for people and for businesses, but ultimately for a better society as well. And so it's wonderful to be part of a conversation then, which has shown that we can build sustainable well-being in a sustainable world through ultimately reducing our relationship with work and through reducing our working hours. I'm really delighted to be joined here with some of the leading experts in the field this evening. And with that, they're all going to be giving their kind of insights into the work that they've been doing into progressing this conversation around the importance of a 4-day week. So first of all, this evening, we'll have Professor Juliet Schor, who's going to speak to us about the landmark kind of research that she has been doing with 4-Day Week Global and her career on working time over the past few years, which has generated huge international acclaim and attention. We're going to then hear from Congressman Mark Takano, who has been leading the charge on the conversation of reducing working time in the United States through the legislative changes proposed in the 32-Hour Workweek Act. We're then going to hear from Jon Leland, who is going to speak a little bit around the lived experience of implementing a 4-day week through his work as Chief Strategy Officer of Kickstarter, and then also his individual role in leading the conversation of a 4-day week in the US, as well as the US 4-day week partner. And finally then, I suppose we're going to hear from 4-Day Week Global and our representatives and the founders of our organization, Andrew Barnes and Charlotte Lockhart, who've played a significant role in helping to scale this conversation and this movement globally and helping us to achieve, the aim of what we have, which is to create 1 million new years of free time across the world. So I'm very excited to have you all here this evening and to be in a room with all of you. And it's been a pleasure working with all of you over the last few months and to get to learn from all of you. And I'm sure that tonight's attendees will, learn a lot about this conversation and go forth and bring this conversation to new places as well. I suppose perhaps the most significant movement maker has been the publication of the 4-day week pilot study trials over the last few years, of which it has received significant attention from international media and has started the conversation in a way that I think when I was involved in the Irish campaign 3 or 4 years ago, we couldn't have ever anticipated. So without further ado then, the most important person in helping us understand why a 4-day week works, I'd like to invite Professor Juliet Schor to tell us about what the latest research is telling us. Over to you, Prof.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's really fantastic to be here. Very exciting to have Congressman Takano here and to see the momentum that this movement has developed, and to see, not just businesses and employees, but legislators, regulators, labor unions, civil society groups, lots of folks getting involved. So I wanted to show you some slides to make sure. How's that looking? It's looking busy. Yeah. Are you able to see the wrong one? Let me just swap those screens. Okay. Can someone tell me that that's the right slide showing up there?
All good, Julie.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we, 4-Day Week Global, has been organizing trials for companies who want to try out a 4-day week, 32-hour weeks with no reduction in pay. And we have been studying what's happening. Our first trial started in February of 2022 with the Irish trial that Dale just mentioned. And we've been running trials ever since then. And the findings that I want to show you today are all of the US and Canadian organizations put together first, and then I'm going to show you really exciting new results that we have, which look at what's happening in all of the companies and nonprofits around the world that we've studied that have completed a whole year of the 4-day week. So we're going to see how durable these great findings that we have at 6 months are. So just a quick slide to say what we track and how we track it. We do employer surveying, so we collect data from the employers. We do 4 waves from employees at the baseline, i.e. before the trial starts, midpoint, 3 months in, 6 months, and then 12 months. It's a long survey for most of what we're collecting. Details on their work experience, on their well-being, but also on time use outside of work, energy use, demographics, and so forth. In the middle of the trial, we do a time diary for their off day to see how they're using it. And then we, along with local teams in many of the countries that we're working in, also are doing interviews. We are just starting a round of pre-trial interviews. For the most part, we've been doing mid and post-trial interviews. Okay, so a little bit about who these organizations are. So the first group that I'm going to show you, as I said, are US and Canadian. Participant industries are mostly white collar, but not only. You can see we have construction, we also have manufacturing, professional services and marketing. In the US group is the biggest. In some of the others, IT tends to be a little bit bigger. We tend to have small companies. For the most part, here's the size distribution. So you can see that about half are in the 11 to 25 range. However, in part, that's an artifact of the way the trials are set up. It doesn't mean that this is not a work schedule that works for larger companies. It's just that they are more able to do this on their own without officially joining one of our trials. One other thing you can see here is that this particular group, the US and Canada group, is rather remote. So 44% of them are fully remote, and the other group is either fully in-person or hybrid. That's a little bit higher than what we have in our sample, our global sample for all of the more than 200 companies that have been involved. So let's start with the company findings. And at the end of the trial, we asked them to rate the experience, how it's been going to that 4-day week on a scale of 1 to 10. Overall impact of the trial on their organization is an 8.7. So a really extraordinarily high positive impact. We also asked them to rate productivity and performance and of their organization during the trial, 7.7 on both of those. And we look at a number of other things. For the one I'm going to focus on here is revenue. So for this group of companies, they had a 15% increase in revenue over the course of their trial. But we also see things like decline in people who are seriously considering their job, leaving their jobs. About a third less likely to leave at the end than they were before the trial. And the proof, in a way, is really in the pudding. We have, in this group, not one of these companies is saying that they're planning to go back to a 5-day schedule. 89% are either definitely, permanently continuing, or they are continuing for now without having yet made an all-time permanent decision. The other 11% are leaning towards continuing. So this is working out really, really well for these companies. We also see declines in absenteeism and sick days. Employees, similarly, in fact, maybe even a little bit more enthusiastic, rate at a 9.1. 95% want to continue with the 4-day week. One of the really big findings here is self-reports of productivity. We ask people, what is your current work ability level compared to your lifetime best? And between from the baseline to the end point of the 6 months, we see more 57% increasing their current workability, and the size of that increase is actually also very large. Almost everyone, 95%, reduced their work time. And to be sort of economistic about this, we asked a question about what economists call willingness to pay. When asked how much pay they'd require in their next job to go back to 5 days, about a third said between 26 and 50%, 12% said more than 50%, and 14% say no amount of money can induce them to go back to 5 days. And now we're going to see why that is. One reason is that on all of our health and well-being measures, there are large increases for virtually, for large numbers of people. So 69% of employees experienced reductions in burnout, 40% felt less stress, almost 60% a decline in negative emotions, increases in people's physical health, their mental health, 45% or less fatigue, 40% had fewer sleep problems, anxiety falls for about 40% of the sample. People exercise more, they have healthier behaviors, their work-family balance improves, their conflict between family and work and family, life and work all improves. We have a lot of well-being measures, and on all of them, we have very large increases in average values and large numbers of people who are experiencing those increases. So before I end, I want to tell you about one more set of results that we have. And this is what's happened a year later. So the first set that I've shown you are the 6 months, but you might ask, and of course our team was very curious, wondering about this. Well, what about regression? Maybe it's just that new schedule, people adjust to it, it helps them at the beginning, but do they just revert back to the prior situation? And the answer that we have so far is no. And actually what's happening in many ways is a deepening of the process, and I'll show you why that is in a minute. But in general, almost all of the findings are holding. In every case, there's still a significant improvement from baseline. With a couple of variables, there's a little bit of sliding back, but really not much. So let me start with the first one, really important, which is work hours. One of the things we saw on average, that is at baseline, work hours in these companies were 38 hours a week. That's what employees are telling us, not this sort of statutory. 6 months, at 6 months, they were down to about 34. So they had about a four-hour reduction. 6 months later, they're down even more. And I think that's really important. It shows that the process of work time reduction may take a little while to set in. And that is something we're also finding in the interviews. There are reasons why it may take a few weeks or months for people to get into a groove. But the fact that work isn't creeping back up after those 6 months is really important. I'll tell you one other point, which we don't have a slide on, but the analyses that we're doing now show that the larger the work time reduction, the bigger the improvement in all of those well-being measures that I just talked about. One other thing that's really important, and this is really, we haven't talked about the 100-80-100 model that Andrew developed at Perpetual Guardian, but the point of that model is to reorganize work rather than just intensify work. And one of the things you can see, we study work intensity here. This is not a speed up model. This is not something to just get people working harder and faster, because if you did that, you wouldn't get all of those well-being improvements. But you can see that 12 months from baseline, work intensity is actually lower than it was at baseline. So people are really figuring out how to reorganize work to work in better ways. Burnout has remained low. Physical health improvements have actually deepened, improved. Mental health got even better. Life satisfaction was maintained. Job satisfaction fell back just a bit. I think that's the part where maybe people do get a little bit used to it. Work-life balance improved, and the overall experience was not a significant difference. Last slide I want to show you, because this is a really important part of the 4-day week movement, is environmental outcomes. Fewer people commuting to work by car. We tested to see if there was a travel rebound, meaning did people take 3-day weekends and fly off and increase their eco footprints for that reason? And the answer to that is no. And then finally, 42% reported doing more environmentally friendly activities during the trial, supporting the hypothesis that I've spent a lot of time on, which is to see whether people who have more time can live in more environmentally sustainable ways. And so far, we are showing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Schor. And I think, it's great to see that potential growth for research there into, the importance of building sustainability interventions, and how something like working hours, which people probably don't think of, could actually play a very intrinsic role in building a sustainable world. With that, then, moving on with the fact that I suppose it's showing that this is a potential intervention that has multiple benefits. And with that, we've had, the importance of academics, the importance of entrepreneurs, the importance of organizations, but of more importance and of equal importance, Congressman Mark Takano and the political side of reduced working time is paramount. And so Congressman Takano has been leading out on starting this conversation around reduced working time in the US, and leading it through the proposal of a 32-hour work week act. And so I think it would be great, Congressman, to hear, first of all, a little bit around why you decided to take on this cause and what it meant to you, and how has this conversation grown as you have brought this into the national mindset.
Well, thank you, Dr. Whelehan. I am pleased to be here. My name is Mark Takano. I have the pleasure of serving as the member of Congress representing the 39th District of California, which encompasses Riverside, Moreno Valley, Jurupa Valley, and the city of Paris. So many folks may know me or as the author of the 32-Hour Work Week Act in Congress, legislation that has come to the forefront of labor conversations in the United States and abroad. The question of a shortened work week is a productivity issue for employers and a quality of life issue for employees that branches into spheres beyond the walls of the workplace. Healthcare, education, and childcare are all affected by the number of hours employees spend at work. So very specifically, my bill, what it does is it amends what's known in the United States as the Fair Labor Standards Act, which established really the 40-hour work week back in the 1930s. Prior to that, it was not unusual for workers to work far in excess of 40 hours, and the 40-hour work week was codified into law in the United States in the 1930s. So what would my bill do? It would reduce the standard work week from 40 to 32 hours for non-exempt employees that are not exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Employers would be required to pay overtime compensation to non-exempt employees whose work exceeds 32 hours in a standard work week. With the 32-hour Work Week Act, I envision enacting this legislation to make work standards, to change work standards passed down from a different era, over 70, 80 years ago. It's time that I believe that we modernize the Fair Labor Standards Act in the United States to better reflect the workplace and today's workers. The feedback that I'm getting from constituents about this bill has been resounding. It's really been one of the most asked about legislation to date. Now, I first introduced this legislation during, well, actually more toward the lifting of the COVID-19 pandemic, as workers began to emerge from the pandemic and rethink their relationship to work. In the United States, workers began really reckoning with their own mortality as they witnessed 1 million of their own fellow Americans, their families, friends, neighbors, and community members die from the virus. That number is, far in excess of any number of Americans that died in any war, including the Civil War, which to date has been the war that had the most Americans die. The COVID-19 pandemic, if we were to measure it against the numbers of Americans that died in combat and wars, I would say is easily one of the more cataclysmic sort of occurrences we've had in America. Workers came to better appreciate the time that they had with family and time outside of work, and workplace responsibilities necessitated by the pandemic. They didn't want to just anymore wake up in traffic or would just sit in traffic after waking up and work for 8 hours and repeat this cycle 5 days on a monotonous loop. Amidst the tragic loss experienced during the pandemic, there's no doubt that it was that it has been a wake-up call for workers to take charge of their lives. Now, as a senior member of the House Education and Workforce Committee in Congress, a lot of my work focuses on how the American workforce can pay enough attention to productivity, prioritize it in proportion, how much it can also deal with compensation and a healthy work-life balance. For decades, workers have been working longer hours while productivity has skyrocketed, yet in that very same period, wages have remained stagnant for the most part. On average, workers in the United States work 200 hours more per year than workers in other developed countries. So this Congress, I have reintroduced the 32-hour Work Week Act, and I was thrilled to receive an endorsement from 4-Day Week Global, the nonprofit that has made waves around the world. Under the stewardship of Andrew Barnes and Charlotte Lockhart, a critical platform has emerged for forward-thinking individuals contemplating a truncated work week to collaborate and test the idea. Employers and governments alike in all stretches of the world have begun to contemplate what the future of work will hold. Now, through the hard work in organizing the 4-Day Week Global, we have witnessed many real-world examples of both domestic and international companies and governments piloting the concept of a 32-hour work week with very promising results. And we're going to learn more about this later. The most recent report released by 4-Day Work Week Global provides even more support for the concept of this reimagining people's relationship with their work. Groundbreaking ideas such as this typically take time to become palatable to the public. Take, for instance, the ongoing fight for a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour in America, with the notion of raising the federal minimum wage to $15 was first introduced. People claimed the idea was too bold and would never come to fruition. And then as time progressed and the public saw the value and need for the federal minimum wage to be updated, the court of public opinion weighed in and emerged in a more progressive manner. People's relationship with their work will also be impacted by the integration of artificial intelligence in more workplaces. Even in the technology's infancy, we're witnessing transformative changes to the workforce. Yet, many questions remain about its impact and how we can use AI to restructure our workforce and redefine the typical work week. The pace of the breakthroughs in AI is happening rapidly before our eyes, and as a legislator, I'm particularly interested in how this technology will be deployed across all the different sectors of the workforce, if not across various sectors of the workforce, if not all of them. We must begin having more robust conversations about the impacts that AI will have on labor specifically, and to further evaluate the potential impacts on a typical work week. Now, historically, workplaces have implemented technology to increase productivity and improve the lives of workers. From the assembly line to computers, workplaces have adapted, and the numbers of hours in the work week have decreased with these novel innovations. Now, one concern is that AI will only benefit certain workplaces more than others. Traditional office workplaces may be able to reap more benefits from AI than service-oriented jobs. But we cannot leave those service workers behind. They too deserve to enjoy the benefits of emerging technology that others have access to. A 4-day work week can serve as an equalizing force to bring equity across industries. Now, I'm looking forward to the enriching discussion of the 4-day week global, 4-day week global's most recent study results. And I want to thank everyone for joining into this conversation today. And I look forward to continuing today's conversation about the break rooms, the boardrooms, and the halls of Congress about the future of a 4-day work week. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And I think it's great to see the many different streams in which 4-day week is being considered from an equity perspective, from an AI perspective. And certainly the branches of which we're starting to see these conversations emerge, particularly AI over the last few months. And I suppose with that, I think there's no better person to bring in than Jon to speak a little bit around how, I suppose, Jon, you got first involved in this from social entrepreneurship point of view, and through your work as Chief Strategy Officer there, and then obviously your very key passion towards sustainability as well. So I'll hand over to you to tell us a little bit around your work with 4-day week to date.
Thank you so much, Dale, and thank you to the representative for his leadership on this issue in particular. My name is Jon Leland. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Kickstarter. I also lead sustainability for Kickstarter. I also am a co-founder of the 4-day Workweek campaign. So I'll start a little bit there in talking about what this organization is doing, which is leading the issue in the US for an equitable transition, as the representative noted, to a 4-day work week in the US for the benefit of all workers, organizations, and society. And this US-based nonprofit is born out of the work that I kicked off with Charlotte and Andrew Barnes at 4-day Week Global a few years ago, just reaching out to them and honestly saying, I think this is the right time for this issue. As the representative noted, this came out of COVID and a real rethinking of the nature of work and the relationship between work and time and who we are as people, family, and rest and everything. And it seemed like a unique opportunity we had to kind of rethink what work is in the US. And so we worked together on really kickstarting this issue in the US a few years ago, and that led to the first US pilot that launched last year, and you'll hear more from Andrew and Charlotte about the US pilot that is kicking off, or the global pilot, but really focused on the US, kicking off later this year. At the 4-day Workweek campaign, we focus on a few program areas: public engagement and advocacy. We do policy support, so we're working to support the drafting of legislation at the federal, state, and city level in a number of places across the country. And just doing employer engagement, making sure that they have resources and hear about, honestly, these opportunities to pilot a 4-day work week in a supported environment. So I'll talk a bit about my experience at Kickstarter. We joined, as I said, the 4-day week global pilot last year. It's a 6-month pilot. You'll hear more about what that experience entails. But from our end, I want to talk through about what it means to actually do this as an executive at a company. And ultimately, I think this is the most practical definition I have for what it means to live with a 4-day work week, particularly as an employer with salaried employees. It's really just a different norm, right? Because the 5-day work week, 5-day, 40-hour work week is a norm. And particularly salaried employees are flexing around that norm. And it's just shifting that to an expectation that with good leadership, better practices, and just that better balance and engagement you get out of a shorter work week, we can usually get the work done that we need to get done in that time, as long as we're smart about it. And that has proven to be the case, as Dr. Schor mentioned, for a number of employees. What it takes to make this work, at least in our experience, is participation at every level in an organization. At the leadership level, you really need clear impact-oriented goals. You just have to be clear about what's important to you as an organization. You need metrics for velocity, efficiency, quality of work. You should have these anyways, though. None of these are new things. These are just you need to be good at your job as a leader. And then you want to build a culture of high trust and high expectations, because really what we're saying to our employees is you can have that time back. We trust you to balance your time between any remaining work that may need to get done, and rest and family and anything else. We don't want you working Fridays. We don't expect you to work Fridays. We give you time back to balance your life. And that's really what it means to lead, but that is a very trusting environment. At the team level, you usually do a number of practices. Meetings, honestly, is the lowest hanging fruit, kind of universal fruit, I think, in our work culture. So there's a lot of ways to shorten or eliminate those. As you go through the pilot program, you'll get guidance and advice and tools to help implement shorter meetings and things like that. But we also went through every team where their work is very different at Kickstarter. A customer support team who's answering tickets is very different than an engineering team who's pushing code, very different from the legal team. To go team by team, function by function, and really identify where they have inefficient processes. The good thing is that you talk to anyone and they'll tell you about 5 ways that their job wastes their time. This is a good time to eliminate and address those things. And then just eliminate low impact work. Just again, this is going to what is essential, what's important in an organization to execute, what's going to drive impact, get rid of everything else. And then it's at the individual level. It's important that everyone's sort of pulling in the same direction on this. And again, it's that message of you are an adult. We trust you to balance your time. And we've got a few days that we want to be all here together, all working in a coordinated, focused way. But the rest of the time is yours. When you are at work, we expect you to be more focused and have higher engagement. That happens naturally because people are better rested, to be honest. And then something we don't ask for, but just happens, is higher loyalty. People stick around, as Dr. Schor mentioned. And so our outcomes at Kickstarter, I'll just run through very quickly, were that our OKR achievement rate, which is OKRs are objectives and key results. This is, as the Chief Strategy Officer, this is actually the thing I care about more than anything, because this is what I lay out for the company every quarter to say, we need to execute these things. These are the most important things to execute as an organization. And we were at about 62% executing those. We went to 95%. That is a huge jump. And a big part of that jump, which I was actually surprised about how impactful it was, is that employee retention was okay. I think it was pretty normal, basically isn't a problem anymore. We've had a 4-day work week for over a year now. And, we lose employees sometimes, either through, sometimes we have to fire someone, sometimes we eliminate a role, sometimes people leave. But when people leave of their own accord, we also we mark whether or not that is a regrettable departure or not. If it's not a regrettable departure, that person was probably on their way out anyways, to be honest, because we were sort of moving them out of the company, or the role didn't really make sense. We have not had a single regrettable departure in over a year. And keeping employees, keeping teams intact, not just that one employee, but what it means for a team to work together over time and how much more efficient they get, is just transformational for organizational productivity. It's been remarkable. Employee engagement, way up. Work-life balance, way up. Motivation to go beyond in your job. These were things we were measuring anyways for years, honestly. All of them have gone way up. Do you see yourself working at Kickstarter in 2 years? The average employee in the tech industry leaves a company after 2 years. It's a very itinerant workforce. That's also gone way up. And as I said, employee retention is through the roof. So those were our outcomes at Kickstarter. So I think my favorite stat, my favorite number is this at Kickstarter, 3,564. Kickstarter is a company, it's not that, we have a big footprint in the world, but we aren't that big. We are a little over 100 people at this point. That is how many days we returned to employees in the first 12 months. We had productivity go up, we had outcomes for our business go up, and we returned 3,564 days to people in our company in 1 year. That is a remarkable amount of time to give back to people. And, we are a company with a lot of young parents. And these are pictures of all young parents at our company spending time with their kids. And that to me is like the most heartwarming part of this as a business leader. The only picture in here that isn't someone with their kids is the second photo, which is me with one of our employees' kids, because I don't have any kids. And I like hanging out with our employees' kids. But it's been amazing to hear the stories about just how transformational it is for people, all while getting better results from a just pure company perspective. It is really remarkable. So I really encourage everyone on this call to pursue a pilot, let the data decide, and you'll see that it works for your organization as well. And if you want to reach out and talk more about this issue or how you get involved in it in the US, feel free to email me, jon.leland@workfork.org. And otherwise, I'll hand it back to you, Dale.
Thank you, Jon. And thank you for really, providing a very practical example of, your role, obviously, as Chief Strategy Officer. You are determined to look at outcomes and actually to just make one simple organizational change, and to see that drastic growth, is quite powerful. You ended off there with once in a century opportunity, and I think that leads us kind of nicely into the next kind of speech from Andrew and Charlotte, who took the leap of faith in this conversation around a 4-day week a long time before this was something that was within social norm of conversation, when Andrew took the risk and took the leap on his own company, Perpetual Guardian, back in 2018. So Andrew and Charlotte, it's great to have you here, and it would be great for you to give us a bit of an idea as to how has 4-day week worked for Perpetual Guardian over the last few years, now that it's been well institutionalized, and how have you made it work through the program intervention?
Well, thank you, Dale. I guess, and good afternoon, evening, morning, everybody. I always start these things by saying I always feel a little bit of a fraud, because we talk about returning, a lot of time to people, and it's great in terms of work-life balance and everything. And that was not the journey I was actually on 5 years ago. It was very simply prompted by reading some articles from the UK Economist magazine, which told me that people weren't that productive in the working day. And I was wondering how I could fix that problem. And I thought maybe I could fix it by asking people to work less. And so the trial, when we set it up back in 2018, was simply to say, what would you do differently if I decided to pay you for 5 days, but you only had to work for 4? Can I get better productivity? And the short answer to that, of course, was yes, you can. And we very quickly, we walked into our little trial, didn't we, Charlotte, with no idea what we were doing, not much planning. I basically just announced it one afternoon, and we gave ourselves a bit of a month to try and work out what we would do differently, and then ran our pilot. But we have now been running it in Perpetual Guardian for broadly close to 5 years. And what we've found is what Jon has found, in that productivity, has gone up. We found that our engagement scores went off the scale. We found that it was easier to attract and retain people, to work in possibly one of the dullest industries in the world, the trust industry. I mean, nobody gets up in the morning and says, I want to work for a trust company. But yet we now have people sort of queuing down the street to work for the organization. Our sick days have halved. This is at its heart, if you look at it purely from the business perspective for a second, this is purely a business process improvement strategy. And actually, I say that because far too often the business side of this discussion turns around and rejects the idea of making this change. And they try to reject it on the basis that it wouldn't work in my business. It wouldn't work in my industry. And what they're not doing, what leaders are not doing, is actually posing the question, well, why not? Because whilst the pilot programs now have been running, in, I think, about 10 countries worldwide, what they are demonstrating is, regardless of country, culture, sector, broadly the same results seem to keep dropping out. In that, productivity improves, work-life balance improves. The benefits of rethinking how you work are shared far more equally between the business and the employee, far more than any process re-engineering exercise that you might otherwise do. But equally, we are seeing, because separately we work with large organizations who don't need, I think as Juliet said, don't need to go through our pilot programs. And the largest of those organizations has over 100,000 employees. That those organizations are starting to see the same benefits that we're seeing across the organizations that go through the pilot. I think at its heart here, what this is a recognition in that the way we work today, which was, I think, as Congressman Takano identified, the way we work today is largely a construct of 100 years ago and the environment that existed 100 years ago, often based around repetitive manufacturing processes, is no longer fit for purpose for the 21st century. And in an environment where increasingly we are asking people to bring their creativity to work, as opposed to just their muscles, that actually if you harness the power of that creativity, that is the trick, I think, that finds the increased productivity and therefore the ability for people to not just improve the performance of the organization, but then more critically, to improve the performance of their lives. Now, it's a thing that when you look at when we introduced things like the 5-day week, years ago, part of that was also to effect and recognize social change that was going on in our broader society and community. And it's, I think, a point for me that as I look at the issues that we face as society going forward around the breakdown probably of traditional family, the issues around mental health, education, the environment, a lot of those things are created because we have a world in which work has now intruded into far more of our waking hours than was ever the case before. But at the same time, we have made ourselves incredibly time poor so that the things that would otherwise have mattered no longer have any time that's allocated to them. And I think where we're starting to say, are we not, Charlotte, that I think it's starting to think about what that would do if we made that change in a broader sense across society. What would our society look like? And would, in fact, those benefits flow more widely?
And I think that when we started on this journey, so Jon Leland contacted us just after the pandemic had started and said, I want to run an awareness campaign for the US around reducing work time. And so we sat down with him and also Alex Pung from our team. And I said to the chaps, I said, look, you know what, you want to be careful what we wish for, because if we create all of this awareness, we actually need a structure. When people say, that's great, I understand why I should, but how am I going to do that? And so the development of the pilot programs was really about answering that need around how do we support businesses with the how. And what our pilot programs have shown around the globe, and you only have to read our research. I believe it's in the chat there that Professor Schor has led for us. No matter what country you're in, no matter what industry you are in, you can reduce work time, because, as we know, Henry Ford is credited with having set up the 5-day work week. I'm pretty sure there were a lot of people that thought he was crazy at the time. And there are plenty of people who think that we're crazy. But he's also credited with saying, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you are right. And the business leaders that go on our pilot programs, no matter whether they're a fish and chip shop or sitting in an office, they have business leaders that say, I think we can give this a go. And they are motivated by their own why. What is your why for being even on this call? The whys are variable. The biggest one post-pandemic, and I think Congressman Takano has certainly alluded to this in what he was saying, it is that employees are now choosing who they're going to work for. They have a control of and a discretion over who they choose as employers and the type of employment that they want, that is being amplified by TikTok, amplified on social media. The whole great resignation, the quietly quitting is a reflection of that. As modern employers, we need to understand that those are the people that we need to encourage to come and work on our businesses. And so the number one reason that people join our pilot program these days is to attract and retain the great staff. And look at the statistics that Jon Leland gave you in an industry which is known for staff moving around and staying for 5 minutes. And Juliet's research shows you that this makes that is the thing that unlocks that. But very importantly, in the 21st century, we need to be looking at better ways of running our workforces. And so legislation such as what Congressman Takano is proposing here is actually a reflection of the way that our society has changed. And that has led to a change in our workplace. And so I encourage you all, those of you who are on this call, check out our next pilot program. We're running one in the US. The details of how to get into it will be in the chat, but also just hop on to 4dayweek.com. And there'll be further information from Jon from the US campaign as well. So join us and be part of, I was going to say the future of work, but it's not. The future of work is now. We're here. We're already doing it. And you can too. As business leaders, we need to remember that we borrow our people from their lives.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Charlotte. And I think it's great to hear the genesis of how this idea has grown and how you're evolved thinking around, you probably never thought about what was going to happen when you started on this journey. You probably certainly didn't think that you'd be in a conversation here 5 years ago, but that is the beauty of this project. Continues to show us new things. So thank you all for your contributions to date. And I think now's a really nice opportunity for us to be able to answer some questions from some of the attendees here. So I've been collecting some of them, but I think perhaps the first question I'd like to be able to ask is to the Congressman. One of the issues, I suppose, as we run global pilot studies across the world, the relationship between work and society is quite different. So we have a pilot planned for Sweden in the upcoming months, and the issue and the conversation around working time is very much part of the national conversation for many years. One of the participants here asks, essentially, what is required, do you think, in order to help folks who've been in the workforce for 30 plus years and that they have been, I suppose, led to believe that 40 hours or hustle culture and long working hours is the way in order to be most successful in American society? What is your bill trying to do in order to try and, I suppose, reconcile those two different ways of thinking?
Well, that attitude, I think, has already been questioned by huge numbers of people. That it no doubt exists, the belief of working super long hours. I mean, I don't dispute that story, that narrative is in American culture. But I do sense a shift that was accelerated during the pandemic. It pre-existed the pandemic even, but the pandemic, I think, really did change a lot of people's minds. I'll tell you a short anecdote. A lawyer friend of mine that I've known for a long time, he's a trust and estates lawyer, was moving offices from his Beverly Hills sort of area in Los Angeles. So it's a nice place to have offices. But he observed that he has a hard time parking his car Monday through Thursday. That it's difficult to find parking, but not so hard to find parking on Friday morning, Friday afternoon, whatever. It's just an anecdotal observation that there's just less people working on Friday, less activity on Friday. That de facto things are changing in America, at least in this sector of the workforce. He also sits on a hospital board, and they've had discussions about having to hire more physicians because they're seeing a norm emerging that the next generation of physicians are not interested in working the same amount of hours. So culture is already moving in a certain direction. There are certain parts of the country, like the Bay Area, with a lot of high-tech workers, where I got a lot of requests for interviews when I first dropped the bill. That there's a lot so discussion is a lot more intense among people who are exempt. They're salaried workers that earn enough money that are usually exempt from overtime protections in the Fair Labor Standards Act. Interestingly enough, so we're talking about doctors, highly trained people who have a lot of leverage because of their skills. What my bill is doing is it's asking the question for non-exempt employees, those that are protected by the law, how is it that we can move hourly workers into the same opportunity of the 32-hour work week to ensure that they get paid enough money to be able to have a 4-day work week? I'm even thinking of that we need to talk in terms of the 4-day economy along with the 4-day work week, because the economy is somehow shifting. People send me articles all the time. I just got sent an article, I think it was in the New York Times, about restaurateurs who are having hard times finding chef and restaurant workers. So restaurant industry was especially affected by this great resignation. It's a really grueling, hard work. This restaurateur entrepreneur couple has decided to really open the restaurant for 4 days a week as a strategy to lure back the chef and to say, look, we're not going to have the same work schedule that we had before. We're literally going to have our business operate on 4 days a week. These are things that are not being compelled by the law. They're choices that people are making. I think there'll be a critical mass of people beginning to change their attitudes, where we have to ask ourselves fundamentally, is there a point at which we do need to change the law so that everybody can partake in this? And I think AI is going to force us to have these conversations as well. People are afraid that jobs are going to be taken away. But how do we, if it's true that maybe less work is required, how is it people? How are we going to have enough people to have a mass consumer-based economy? Like, if all the benefits go to capital, who's going to buy the stuff that capital makes and the services that capital provides if we don't solve this problem? So it won't just be, I think, a matter of earning overtime at 32 hours. We're going to have to think about other ways in which we make a collective choice that everybody works less because everybody can. And society is going to survive. Our economy is going to survive.
Great, thank you for that. I think that actually touches on, Andrew, some of the concepts that you've spoken around about the different types of work and how it relates to 4-day week. Particularly, you spoke about the gig economy in your own book, 4-day week. So what would your thoughts be on what does that 4-day week economy look like?
Well, I think, interestingly, one of the things that we need to look at is our ability to generate other activity outside of the traditional working period. And I think that was also one of the things that Henry Ford had recognized. It was, if you give people an extra day off, then there was a good reason to buy a car. If all you were doing is 1 day a week was just going to church, you didn't need it. And so in a way, what Congressman Takano is talking about there is the same thing. If you actually generate more time in turn generates the opportunity for more, not just economic activity, but if you've got a day a week, then, which is an addition to your normal working time, you've then got time to invest in yourself. Now that could be health-wise, you could get fit. Now that obviously has implications for the healthcare system, which is dragging an enormous amount of money out of our economies at the moment in order to pay for things like obesity, mental health issues. So if you can have a society whereby people are healthier, that have more time to cook, they're cooking better things, they're not consuming fast food with high sugars, high fats, they have got more time to exercise, they are healthier, that has a societal benefit. But if they've also got a day a week where they can invest in themselves mentally, intellectually, and on the basis, if you think of their skills, suddenly I can go to college for a day a week and I can upskill myself. And in an environment where AI potentially is starting to impact, and therefore maybe the skills that I have are no longer suitable, how do I improve myself to meet that challenge? So I see that by creating more time, what we're doing is creating a more flexible and more robust economy. It's actually the absolute reverse, I think, of what a number of commentators are talking about by thinking it will destroy the economy. I think far from that. The evidence suggests that not only does productivity continue, but we would create a far more robust business, a far more robust society if time was more freely available.
And I think also the other thing is, what are you doing? You know, when we talk about the work ethic and working, what are you working on? So, you know, you might be working on some of these things that will improve you and your family's lot, but also, you know, as a society, we have slipped away from our civic duties. We have slipped away from working with in or alongside charities, or working and donating your time. The organizations like Rotary and Lions that really struggle to get people to join these service clubs and do the fine work that they have through history are renowned for doing. And so therefore it's about actually taking some of that time back that we put into that paid work and time that we allocate to it, and putting that back into our communities and being more mindful about how we in the community and in our families.
Great, thank you both for that. And I think actually I'd like to pull you in here, Professor Schor, at this point, because your entire thesis over your academic career has been around the relationship with work and creating sustainable well-being in order to create a sustainable environment. What do you see is happening here when we're trying to reduce working hours, and how is it actually influencing on building a more sustainable world?
So I guess the first thing I would say is that everything that we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes or so is strongly shown in the data that we've been collecting. So this is because we are asking people what they're doing on those off days, and they are mostly staying close to home. They are getting involved in hobbies and activities that really matter to them. And we're hearing this in the interviews too, things that they really wanted to do but didn't have time for. Exercise is an important one. I interviewed someone recently who, you know, was taking swimming lessons, an adult who never had, you know, learned to swim, or all kinds of hobbies, and also doing domestic work and childcare. People's childcare costs are going down because they're spending more time with their kids, just as Jon Leland was talking about happening at Kickstarter. So the things that we're seeing sort of anecdotally in individual companies, we're also seeing across this, you know, what is now a very large data set of thousands and thousands of people who we are, you know, finding out what they're doing. And so I do think that this is such an important movement to put us on a track of what I like to think of as sort of powering down. Powering because it is powerful and important. So it's not a weakling. It's not a weakling path. It's a strong path, but it's one in which we're rooted in our values, rather than sort of just chasing the almighty dollar or whatever. The 4-day week global model is an egalitarian model. It raises wages for people at the bottom because it reduces their working hours and doesn't change their pay. So it's really important in that way. Congressman Takano talked about wage stagnation, and that's really key. Any major social change that we have has to deal with the fact that so many people, particularly in the United States, I mean, less true in some other countries, are really struggling just to put food on the table. But I do think it's a huge step in the direction of creating a different kind of economy, and it's just showing up in all of the things that we're measuring. It's a well-being economy. It's an ecologically sane economy. It works from the kinds of things that Andrew was talking about, a sustainable, economically sustainable economy. So Yeah, it's, you know, I also think work time is a 360 strategy because it touches every part of our society. It deals with work, of course, but also with our climate. It deals with our civic lives. It deals with our families and our home lives. And there's really, you know, no part of society that it's not touching.
Thank you, Professor Schor. And then I suppose with that, then, Jon, you play a very key role in sustainability within Kickstarter. And also obviously leading out in this movement within the US. My question, I suppose, is twofold. How do you envisage this as being an equitable policy? How do you see that this does help build, you know, an equal workforce? And secondly, who are the tribe? Who are the people that we should be getting involved in actually to build this conversation? And I suppose what we've missed on talking about, but it's been alluded to, is the involvement of trade union representatives and workers' rights campaigns. And what role maybe have they played in your engagement thus far in the US campaign?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I think from an equity perspective, it is the key thing is making sure that this isn't limited to just white collar, particularly tech workers. It is making sure that this is benefiting workers, hourly wage workers, retail service workers, manufacturing, construction. It needs to touch all of those. And even jobs that aren't on a traditional, even like 5-day, you know, one of my brothers is a fireman, and, you know, that's not a 5-day, 40-hour job, but all of these jobs are structured around the norm of work that is a 5-day, 40-hour work week. So what does it mean to then shift that? And then from a policy perspective, particularly in the US, the 5-day, 40-hour work week, working hours is heavily, you know, has a huge impact on healthcare benefits and other sorts of government benefits that people might be entitled to, either from the government or from their worker, from their employer. And so we need to think about how shifting working hours to be less also impacts those policies, and making sure that we're not having, you know, creating some unintended consequences for workers as we make this transition. So working with policymakers on how to think about those ramifications and work those into bills. From a environmental perspective, honestly, the environment is actually how I got started on this issue in many respects. I'm on the Environmental Leaders Council at the Environmental Defense Fund. I've been doing climate work for over a decade at this point. And it is one of the few things you can imagine, actually. And climate is this like terrifying, I think everyone's getting more existentially terrified by the week at this point by what they're seeing. And most of the envisioning a future when you're really contemplating climate is honestly a kind of scary or a little bit painful. And here we have something that we could do that if we just implemented, if we shifted to a 4-day work week norm in the US, it would reduce carbon emissions just for electricity generation and like travel miles alone, from like automobile travel miles. Those things combined, just taking Friday and turning it from a weekday to a weekend day, would reduce carbon emissions in the US by 50 million tons a year. It's like very clear to look at the data on this. And that's more than 17 states in terms of just their annual carbon emissions. Like that's a greater amount of carbon than 17 of our states. That's a huge impact, doing something that we all want to do anyways. And that doesn't even get at the additional benefits of like reduced healthcare costs. The fact that people are like actually maybe participating in making their communities more resilient and actually thinking about how they can help respond to climate crises in their communities and in this country. So I think it is like one of the few optimistic parts of climate where we can have a real impact, which is just fun and hard to find in that space, to be honest. In the US, labor has started getting involved. The Representative Takano has gotten a number of major labor unions support for his legislation and his bill, which is very important. We are starting to work with them on how you can write this into collective bargaining agreements between unions and employers. There already are a few examples of this in the United States. And in fact, when I introduced this at Kickstarter, I was negotiating our labor contract because we have the first wall-to-wall union in the tech industry. I was negotiating for management, so they were surprised, you could say the least, that I was trying to pitch a 4-day work week while maintaining pay and benefits. But we worked it into our contract as well. So trying to figure out what are some models for unions to push for that can build it into a labor contract is really important as well.
Great. Well, like, congratulations. You know, again, you went against the tide, it seems, and it's just for you. So it's brilliant. And I suppose then I'd like to bring in the congressman again. We have, you know, had huge interest from people in the US saying, I want to get involved. I don't know how to get involved. I'm not, you know, the decision maker. I can't influence this within my own company. What would your advice be to people, I suppose, on how they can help, I suppose, support your bill or support this conversation in the US?
Well, people can, I think, like anything, the original 5-day work week, the 40-hour work week was achieved through political activism. It was achieved through labor unions. It was a social justice movement. I mean, it occurs, you know, somewhat after, you know, we instituted child labor laws. But I think this is a moment that more and more people are talking about it. But that needs to translate into organization. That needs to, I mean, we're having more and more people write about it in academia, and more business leaders. I think the kinds of things that 4-Day Global is doing in instigating more pilots, getting the results of those pilots reported on, the more that we're able to, I mean, it always generates a story. You guys put out some new report, it becomes a pretext for a lot of media stories. Why? Because people are interested in it. People sense that this is the right time. You know, something that the Lockharts, you know, mentioned about how you know, we're sort of we're in a new era, but we haven't completely transitioned into that new era. That the 40-hour work week and its norms are sort of based on a different sort of global economy, a different kind of economy that exists in now in you know, in this century, and that is what is wanting to happen is leveraging and taking advantage of the emerging technologies, and simply collectively as various liberal democratic sort of nations beginning to evolve a new norm. But we can't leave out the politics of it. We can't leave out the fact that you make this a political issue. Let me just mention, you know, my colleague on the Senate, a big voice with a big platform, Senator Sanders, is looking to advance this idea as well. So that's just more evidence that you know, amassing the political support is an important piece of this. So there's already a social awareness, a social movement. It's happening in society. I gave you the anecdotes, my last comment. But now we're now looking at a moment where we've got to codify this in different ways in law.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that brings me back to Professor Schor. You mentioned around equity and the rolling out of this and how it can help bring up, you know, lower paid staff members. But when people think 4-day week, and as Jon alluded to, they think white collar sector, they think Monday to Thursday, Friday off. That's not possible in many sectors. You take healthcare, you take manufacturing, you take service industries. You mentioned before about our 180-100 principle, but what have you observed about how companies have innovated in trying to reduce working time?
So we do have companies across many sectors, including some that you would think, how could it possibly work there? Construction. We have some of the best results from the construction sector on some of our well-being. Manufacturing. But healthcare is another really interesting one. So first of all, it's not a one size fits all. I mean, we talk a lot about Fridays off, and that is the most common way to do this. But these companies are doing it in many ways. There are 24/7 entities in that are doing this. They're already dealing with complicated staffing patterns, and so giving people the 4-day week. We're working with a hospital chain that's doing a 4-day week nurses study. And in fact, the number of healthcare organizations that we're starting to hear from has really increased. I mean, they're coming, normally everything goes through 4-day week global, but I'm getting like healthcare organizations reaching out to me because they're desperate because of the crisis in healthcare staffing. Restaurants are another one. That's not a 9-to-5 business. So they do it in different ways. I mean, some of them have sort of on call, use members of teams who are sort of on call for the, if they have to stay open. Others just already are in much more complex, flexible staffing. I think the other thing is, Jon talked about meetings, the low-hanging fruit, their meetings, distractions. Those are two of the big things in the white collar space. Where you're talking about, I think Charlotte mentioned the fish and chip shop or the brewery or the some of the manufacturing companies. They go where you're dealing with process manufacturing. So they go through all the steps of their process and figure out what is it that they can change to get that productivity back. And the other really big thing is, I guess in the UK, they call it mucking in, but it's this idea that everyone's pitching in because now it's not like, oh, that's not in my job description, I'm not doing it. It's just, it creates a very different vibe and culture in the workplace because, I think of it as a gift economy. The company is giving and the workers are giving back. It's an economy of reciprocity rather than that more I'm only doing the minimum that I have to, or it just, people really want it to work. They give their all for it. There's just, that really helps. And you can get a lot of productivity out of the fact that people are willing to step in when something's not going right in a manufacturing setting and sort of make it right. And I think we're seeing that. I'd say there's only one in industry where we've seen multiple failures, and it's architecture. And it's like we need to think about some of these professions where there's just really, really cultures of burnout and long hours. But this is anecdata, but there've just been a couple of those. And so that, to me, that's an interesting one. What's going on in architectural firms that they can't succeed the way the lawyers are succeeding, or the bankers are succeeding, or the tech folks are succeeding?
Sounds like the next big research question. So, Julie, I think what you've raised there is that 4-day week and Parkinson's law and the reduction in working time and forcing people to complete work in a new and innovative way accelerates team performance and innovation and creativity, all these skills that future workforce leaders are trying to generate anyway. But another unintended consequence that we found from our findings is that this disproportionately benefits women in the workplace. And Charlotte, I'd like to bring you in here to tell me a little bit around why is it that a 4-day week seems to particularly benefit women, not just in work, but also outside of work?
Quite interesting, actually, because when we first started down this journey, I had a whole heap of my friends go, oh, I do a 4-day week. I negotiated that as part of my package. And I'm like, but yes, are you being paid 80%? Yeah, I negotiated that. I'm like, no, wrong. And so I challenge anyone on this call, this is the conversation you need to have. It's about understanding what is the job, what's the 100% job role, and how can I do that in less time, but still be paid for the 100% job role. And that's what my gender, and it's a large reason for the gender pay gap, is because we spend all of this time being proud of the fact that we have negotiated a reduced package. But then we all know that for the large part, those women, and I'm going to say it's mostly women, to be fair, there are a lot of men probably starting to do this now, plenty of returning fathers coming into the workforce having taken parental leave. But by doing that, you're returning, and then you're doing as much work as everybody else. And often it is actually as many hours, and you're doing it at 10 o'clock at night after the children have gone to bed, or you're actually just more productive and you're doing. So the large part of what we're doing with the coaching that we do is actually understanding what is the 100% job role. And I challenge anyone on this call, because I doubt there are too many blue collar people on this call, but if the women who have the ability to negotiate their packages don't do it, how is the person who is on minimum wage cleaning your offices at night ever going to get those same benefits? We need to be doing that. So that's my little thing for you there. A lecture over.
Dale, I think I just want to add one other thing to that, and certainly it's the observation from our experience, is that if you don't create an environment where it is okay for male leaders to take time out, then it is very difficult to level the playing field in terms of getting men and women getting to the C-suite. So one of the things about this is it makes it okay for men to take those care responsibilities. And I think Juliet will probably note this, that some of the most interesting statistics coming out of the research are the amount of time that men are spending with their families and in childcare. I think up 22%, I think, in one particular survey. Now, that is the thing that gives me hope as well. It's not just about bringing women's pay up. It's actually freeing men to take up their share of care responsibilities and to be fathers and grandfathers, carers. And I think that's a very powerful thing.
It's about creating a social movement that and economic movement that empowers men to be making the same choices that we women have been making since time began. So it's gender balance works both ways.
Great, thank you. And I think you've brought me to my last question as we wrap up this evening's webinar, this day's webinar. You've talked about what's exciting you most about the future of the movement, but I'd like to be able to open that question to all of you. So I'll hand over to the Congressman. What is it about this conversation that excites you most? And where do you potentially see this going in the next few years?
Well, I don't know that I can pinpoint one thing. I mean, this last comment by the Lockharts about how this can affect the different gender roles, and especially the idea that that men can see themselves empowered in different ways to actually spend time to think of themselves sort of disconnected from the old narrative about the role of men in this economy. That's very exciting to me. Very exciting about how we talk about gender equality in the workplace with respect to the shortened work week. But I think I like hearing that from the other panelists that that equity is a big issue here. That we have to this can't be a norm for some. It needs to be a generalized norm across the economic spectrum, and in an interesting way, I think AI is going to make us confront this sooner than later. And what's exciting to me is that a shorter work week, I think it's another way to contextualize what could be something that's very threatening into something that forces us to rethink how we're organized. And that to me is an exciting thing, to not have to be afraid, but to know that we have other adaptations and other tools to adapt. I rather suspect that that we're really onto something here.
Great, thank you, Congressman. And over to you, John. What excites you? Or where do you see this going, particularly with the US movement?
I mean, I'd second everything that everyone's already said. I mean, I think from my perspective, from where I sit, I think we're at what sometimes feels like a perilous moment in the US in many respects. And it's really at point that this is a 360 kind of impact shift for us to take is to me what's really exciting about that for all the things that are concerning to us about the collapse of kind of communities and civic engagement and the environment, gender equity, all of these issues are actually, this is an unlock for getting us into a better position to have, and even the economy, as was pointed out as well, getting us into a more resilient, more flexible, better balanced economy and society and community together. And so we are seeing the momentum on this. We are seeing more and more business leaders wake up to the idea that this actually does work, thanks to the research that Juliet and 40 Week Global have put out. And so to me, it's just a very exciting time and is a kind of beacon of hope in a time that is otherwise feeling kind of increasingly dangerous or a little bit scary in the US.
Thanks, John. And then finally over to you, Julie. You've dedicated your life's academic research to seeing this, and all of that is starting to bear significant fruit in the conversation now. You're probably already thinking, what is the next big question to ask when it comes to 4-day week? So what is that big question for the audience?
Well, I'm going to start by one of the things that I'm really hopeful about, excited, which is that the UAW has put a 32-hour week on the table for its bargaining.
Wow.
About to happen, yes. And IG Metall in Germany, indications are they're going to do the same for 90,000 steel workers whose contracts are up. They are being negotiated this fall. So the finally, like the unions coming in a big way on this, to me, is just really pretty thrilling. But I also I think that following on John's point about we're in what some of us call a polycrisis now, which is just crisis in every place. People are desperate for positive things. This is such a beacon of hope for people. It's such an important thing that people can hang on to as a way that it's not a tinkering. It's like a really deep, important reform that will address so many parts of our polycrisis. And so for me, I published my first book on this in 1992, and to see things kind of regress, and now for this to be back, the fact that shorter work time has become common sense. It is no longer something that people think, oh, that'd be a great idea, but we could never have that. And that has flipped in a way that's just really, I think, very palpable and very powerful.
Great. Thank you, Julie. I think that's a very powerful note to end on. I'd just like to thank the panelists for this evening's really constructive discussion. Thank you, Andrew, and to Charlotte from 40 Week Global, Prof. Juliet Schor from Boston College, Jon Leland from Kickstarter and the 40 Week campaign, and finally, Congressman Mark Takano. Thank you all for your insights and for all the work that you do on this conversation as well. For anyone then who feels motivated and wants to get involved further, we've been posting, I suppose, the different opportunities for you to get involved in 4-Day Week Global. I know there's a large audience here from the US, and we are launching our next US pilot in the next month, and we're actively recruiting for that at the moment. So please do feel free to reach out to 4-Day Week Global or to Jon at Work4 in order to sign up or find out a bit more information about that. If you aren't coming from the US, we also are running pilots, and we have other forms of opportunities to get engaged with. And if you're not able to get it involved and actually sign up formally for a 4-day week, we still want you. So we have an advocates network and want to build this conversation and have as many of you involved in making this conversation as broad as possible. So I'll bring the conversation to a close. Thank you, everyone, and have a good morning, evening, night, wherever you're calling from.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.